My name is Laima and I'm 39. I've been married to my husband Dainis for 12 years. And we have 2 lovely children, still babies, vibrant and childlike. I look at them playing now and feel like, how did this get so much harder for the 2 of us who were supposed to love them the most? If you had asked me a year ago, my marriage would have been solid. We slid and rolled like any couple, but I've always felt that love and trust were at the core of everything we did. Dainis was dependable. He was one of those solid, reliable guys who arrived when it counted. He was good about the mundane, closing the creaking door, helping the children with homework, getting me my favorite chocolate at the end of the day. Those little things were important to me. I thought we were happy, thought he was happy. Then, one evening, everything changed. I recall it with great clarity. The stench of dinner being prepared in the kitchen and the crackle of the children's cartoons on the sound system. Dainis stooped into the room, unobtrusive. Not his usual silence either. This was a cold, distant silence. Distance working all day. I asked, trying to introduce myself. "Yeah," he murmured without even turning around to me. It felt as if he'd said it to me in a certain way. Having eaten dinner, he asked me to join him in the living room. Children were still watching television and I suspected he was going to talk about money or car insurance. But no. His words split my world into 1,000 little bits. "Well, I'll tell you something," he began, his voice strangely low and stony. Oh no, he lost his job, I thought. But it was much worse than that. I am in love with someone else. His gaze met the floor, and it seemed to swallow him up. Initially, I thought I heard him wrong. I blinkered, tilted my head and said, "What was that?" He looked at me, eyes bulging with shame, and repeated it. "I love someone else, Laima. It just happened." I felt as if the room had been sucked dry. My chest swelled and I couldn't catch my breath. I held the arm of the sofa, my fingers digging into the velvet as if that could stabilize me. Well, not him. Not Dainis. Not us. My entire body started shaking. "You mean you love her?" I muttered, barely able to express myself. He nodded. That was it. No lengthy rant, no, but "I love you more." Just a nod. I wanted to yell, to cry, to throw something at him. But instead, I lay there speechless, my heart beating so fast it was painful to hear. "Did you have sex with her?" I started to cry and my voice broke. There was a pause, a long, horrible pause. And then he nodded again. I lost it. I stood up myself and began screaming. "How could you do this to me? How can you do this to our family?" My hands trembled, my voice breaking with every word. If the children heard, it didn't matter to me. It was an instant of fury and elation. Dainis attempted to console me, stating that it was an error, not serious. But what's not serious about being in bed with someone and hating them anyway? I felt sickened, shamed, and betrayed at once. That night I barely slept. The words kept on rushing through my mind. Is she prettier than me? Smarter? Younger? What does she possess that I lack? I stared up at the ceiling and my heart felt split open. By morning, I would not be able to contain myself. I told my sister Eva. She was outraged. More outraged than I had been the night before. "You cannot allow this to continue," she said. "You've got to communicate. Tell his family. Make him feel the consequences of his actions." First, I hesitated. "No, I can't force other people into our marital issues," I said. And yet the more I considered it, the more I concurred with her. I shared this with his parents, brothers, and 2 of his best friends. And you know what? It worked. His mother, Audra, called and cried to him, asking him to rescue his family. His brother deemed him a complete fool. Dainis suddenly was the one pressed, and I felt a slight glimmer of hope. That optimism was reinforced when Dainis called me 1 week later to say he wanted to try it. I should have thought to listen to that word, try. It was such a slender, fragile word. But I was just glad he wasn't going to leave at the time. For months afterward, I dedicated all of my resources to rescuing our marriage. I wanted him to see me, to remember why he loved me. I got more dressed up, prepared his favorite meals, and spent more time taking care of us rather than being mommy all the time. I even recommended marriage counseling and, to his delight, he took it. The situation got better for a while. He was home more. We ate dinner together again. He even became more affectionate, and for a brief second I gulped up and hoped things would return to normal. But that little voice in my head kept saying something's wrong. Still, he stood in an alien sliver. He was too tired to talk to them, checked his phone more frequently, and began taking longer walks to the store. It was understated, but I felt it. One evening, while the kids were sleeping, I directly confronted him. "You're still talking to her, Dainis?" He sighed, the sigh that goes, "I'm in trouble, but I don't want to confess." He wouldn't even stare at me. "Yeah," he finally said. We stayed in touch. It hurt all over again. It was glass shattering the first time it fell. It was sluggish, crushing pressure this time, like a boulder shattering my heart. He continued. He told me to feel for her, and wasn't certain what he wanted. I lost it. I didn't plead this time. I did not cry. I told him to leave. "Get your gear and leave, Dainis. Go get her if she's so damn good." That night, he packed up his things and headed out the door. I felt great for the first few days. I had reclaimed the power over my life. But that power lasted only a moment. By the end of the week, I was alone. I missed him, even though I detested him. I sat in the kitchen in the middle of the night, gazing at our wedding photos, to see if it was all a lie. I reassured myself that maybe, just maybe, I could be his new girlfriend. A week later, he returned. "Not for me, for the kids," he added. He did not want to disrupt the children's family life, he told me. I hoped it was the first step toward reconciliation, so I only let him stay if he went fully non-contact with her. He assured me, and I had her number blocked from his phone. For a while, I lulled myself into thinking we were going well. We both had marriage counseling. It felt good to have our troubles addressed by an expert. For the first time in months, I believed we stood a chance. But even in those counseling sessions, I had a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. There was a vacant look, almost void, in his eyes that I had never noticed. I was too close to him to fail to notice. That feeling would become Discovery Day number 3. Hours turned into weeks, and Dainis was still at home. Life was largely restored to a delicate state of normality. We ate together for dinner. We took the kids to the park on weekends. We even giggled sometimes, but it was contrived, as if we were both just trying too hard to pretend it was okay. But things were not fine, not even close. I felt something wasn't right somehow. I sensed it in the way he turned away from my face when I would ask him easy questions. It was palpable to me when he ran to his phone when it buzzed, looked at it and gave it that guilty look before putting it back in his pocket. He'd made a deal to stop calling her, and I had even blocked her number, but somehow I was sure that if someone needs to call someone, someone will always have a way. I repressed that voice in my head. He's still here, I reminded myself. He chose to stay. That must mean something, right? But my heart was fed up of fighting my brain. This was an anxiety state I had been in so long that I never understood what it felt like to relax. I walked on eggshells each day, worrying about the word I might say, worrying that he would pack his bags and go home again. And I hated that, as if I were the one to fight for his affections when he should have been mine. There was one night when I awoke in the middle of the night and Dainis wasn't at home. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:47 a.m. I wiped my eyes, heart pounding in my chest. Maybe he went to the bathroom. Maybe he was getting water. But when seconds passed, he didn't return. I stood up and stumbled down the hallway, refusing to wake the kids. The bathroom was dark, the kitchen dark, and the living room blank. My chest began to perk up as I headed towards his office, the corner of the house where he kept his laptop. I peered in, and there he was in front of his computer, his face bathed in the screen light. He was smiling. Not a big, teethy smile, but a small, stupid smile. The smile you use to greet a friend you love. I felt my stomach twist. I knew right away. It was her. Had to be her. I looked down, mute for a moment, unsure whether to burrow in or bolt. My heart was pounding so hard, I knew he would hear it. But I could not keep silent. Not this time. "What are you doing?" I said, more sternly than I had planned. Dainis jumped as though he'd been robbed. He closed his laptop and flipped over to face me, eyes bulging like a child trapped with his hand in the cookie jar. Nothing, he declared, too quickly, too prudish. I was just doing work checking. Don't betray me, Dainis. He approached. I could feel my anger building up in my chest. Who were you talking to? I said it is work, he added, rising to defend himself. His entire body posture switched, as if he were preparing to fight. I looked at him for a long time, locked my eyes to his and said, "Shine me." Silence. Pure, heavy silence. He looked back at me, teeth grinding, eyes wandering around the room looking for escape. And then I understood. No words were needed. He didn't need to remark. The expression on his face spoke for itself. "She's her, isn't it?" I muttered, my voice breaking. "You never stopped speaking to her." He sighed. That sigh again. I hated that sigh more than anything else. It was the sigh of a man who was aware that he'd been caught but couldn't muster the energy any longer to deny it. "Yeah," he said softly. "I never stopped." My knees felt weak. I stumbled back a foot, clutching the doorframe to keep myself standing. It felt like the ground had gone flat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw his laptop out the window. But above all, I wanted to be gone. "You were in that counseling room," I cried. "And you told me lies. You lied to the counselor. You promised me." He hung his head as if in contrition, but I had seen it done before. He had done it after the first discovery day. He'd done it on the second try. Now I knew better. "Sorry, Laima," he murmured. "Sorry." Snap. "That is all you have to say. Sorry. You've been cheating me for months, and that's the best you can do." My voice was coming out, and I was afraid to wake the children if I didn't settle down, but I couldn't hold back. All the anger, all the pain I'd been holding so tightly, it came flowing. "You do not even want to come here," I said, waving my shaking finger at him. "You're here because you don't want to be the villain. You want me to close it so that you can say, 'Oh, bad Dainis,'" his wife snubbed him. "And guess what? I'm done with that game. I'm done waging war for you." He looked up at me, eyes wide as if he hadn't realized I was so robust. I was in control for the first time. "Then get me out of here," he whispered. His voice was soft, but I heard the tension in it. "If you're done, please leave, Laima." I reached out to do so. I wanted to tell him to pack up and leave, but something stopped me. It was not love. No, love was dead the moment he confessed that he had never stopped speaking to her. It was something else. Fear. The fear of being alone. The anxiety of having to explain to my kids why their dad was gone. The anxiety of beginning again after a decade of creating a life together. I hated that fear, hated it as much as I hated him there. "Go sleep on the couch." Instead, I muttered, my voice dry and abysmal. He took a deep look at me. I believe he wanted me to weep, to cry, to beg him as before. But I did not. I remained as a rock, eyes on his, unblinking. He finally said a nod, pulled a pillow from the bed and disappeared. I watched him leave, my heart breaking, my mind buzzing with questions. Why would he bother to stay? If he loves her so much, why did he stay here? I did not sleep that night. I was in bed with my eyes open, watching every second of our marriage again like a film I could not stop watching. I contemplated all the little warnings I had forgotten, all the messages I had forgotten. The text messages at midnight, the unscheduled business trips, the fact that he began wearing cologne after years of not bothering. Everything so obvious now. He was not the only one I was enraged at, though. I was angry with myself, angry for letting it happen, hateful for trusting him whenever he said he'd try. Sad I let fear drive my decisions. The following morning, I awoke with a choice. I would not beg him. I would not chase him. And if he did want to stay, he would need to prove he was worth staying for. But after a few days, it was obvious that he didn't want to prove anything. He remained at home, yes, but he was not there. He was mere presence, a body taking up space. I felt like a stranger every time I passed him. I waited for him to do something, to apologize, to stand up for me, to ask forgiveness. Yet he did none of that. And every day that he was there, I watched my heart fall ever so slightly. That sense was the spark that led to Discovery Day number 3. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. Dainis remained at home, but it was no longer home. It was almost like two strangers sharing a room. We didn't even get around to discussing the kids or the bills or the groceries. Every single word between us felt heavy, as if neither of us were tired to feel it. I did not know how long I could endure. One night I would wake up, hearing him breathe on the couch, just a few rooms down. It broke my heart, and not because I didn't miss him. I felt for the person I was before all of this. I missed the part of me that never doubted him. I longed for the me that loved. The kids were beginning to suspect something was amiss. Our oldest, Adrija, once commented to me, "Now why is Daddy sleeping on the couch?" I opened my mouth to reply, but nothing came out. How do you tell a child such a thing? I explained it was because he needed room, and she relented with that childlike confidence. But I could see the concern in her eyes. Children are smarter than we realize. After sleeping with the kids one night, I felt I needed to face Dainis head-on. I no longer could stay in uncertainty. I could no longer wake up each morning feeling that lump in my chest. I needed to know what our position was, even if it was painful. I entered the living room to find him lying half awake on the couch, checking his phone. I crossed my arms before him and said, "We got to talk." He looked up at me, his face eerily empty. "About what?" He murmured, not even taking out his phone. "About this," I said, waving between us. "About what we are doing here, crashing together. I need to know, Dainis. Do you want to be here, or do you want to be the villain if you go away?" That got his attention. He dropped his phone and stood up, massaging his face with both hands. "Why must you always argue, Laima?" "Because I can't keep living like this," I countered. "I'm tired of making it sound like we're a family while you're still thinking about her." Silence. He knew I was right. "Do you love her?" I inquired, barely audible. He stared at me, his eyes cluttered with something I could not discern. Pity, regret, guilt. I was not sure. "I don't know," he said, combing his hands through his hair. "I am just confused, Laima. I love our family. I love our kids. But it doesn't make sense." There it was. It was the one I'd been dreading to hear from the outset. I always told myself that if he didn't love her, we could make it work. But now he was revealing that he didn't even know what he was feeling. "Then go." My voice was as tight as I could manage. "If you're so frustrated, go away. Go figure it out. But you don't get to sit around and pull me along with you while you brainwash yourself." He stared at me as if I had kicked him. "What about the kids, Laima? You don't want them to be without their father at home." "They already are," I countered snarlingly. "You're here, but you're not. You don't think they can notice. You believe they don't feel it every day." I approached him a little closer. "Try to be their father, then be their father. But don't let them fool you into remarrying a spouse you have long since divorced." I could feel my words striking him like rocks, each one harder than the last. He did not know the answer. Once again, he had no justification, no twisted thought of his own to blame me. "I'm giving you until next week." My heart raced in my chest. "You either buy it out, no more lies, no more confusion, no more her, or you pack your bags and go home. I'm not doing this anymore." He sighed, sighing, his eyes trained on the floor like a berated child. "Okay," he said quietly. "I understand." But that was the problem. Dainis knew it all the time but never did. This pattern had played out too many times for me. He would be silent, allowing me to feel that I was in control, and then back to doing as he had always done. Seemed that if something really did change, it had to be me. And the next day, I did something I never had planned. I contacted a divorce lawyer. I did not tell anyone. Not Eva, not Dainis, not his family. The idea of coming into that office by myself was odd. I was greeted by the receptionist, who smiled warmly at me and presented me with a clipboard full of paperwork to fill out. My fingers trembled as I typed my name, my birth date, and the reason for my visit. Reason for consultation. Considering divorce. I stood in the waiting room, heart pounding, wondering if I was taking the right decision. So long, I had been holding on to the notion of saving my marriage. I had so fought to keep our family together, believing that if I loved him enough, he would transform. And yet, here in that silent office, I realized something. Love shouldn't be like this. Love is not meant to walk on eggshells. It shouldn't feel like running after someone who continues to run away. It's not meant to be a feeling of terror whenever they reach for their phone. When I walked into the attorney's office, I was already set in my ways. I was tired of waiting for him to shave. I was done fighting for us alone. My lawyer, a quiet woman called Ruta, questioned me. "Do you have evidence of adultery?" she demanded, tapping her pen on a notebook. He nodded. "Yeah, I have screenshots of emails he left her. I also have bank accounts for hotel stays that he said were work trips but weren't." She nodded. "Good. So, if it has to happen, that will make life easier." We spent the next hour explaining the process. She took me through everything step by step, and I felt a little in control for the first time in months. I left that office feeling like I'd never felt stronger. By the time I returned home, Dainis was at the kitchen table sipping coffee as if it were any other day. "Where were you?" He looked up at me. "Out," I said quietly, leaving my coat on the door. "Out where?" He pressed, his eyes narrowing. "To do what I should have done a long time ago," I said, staring at him. I wasn't afraid this time. I did not feel anger. Felt peace. His face shifted. I saw it. The awareness that I no longer feared him running away. He was for the first time terrified. That evening he wanted to speak. "No, we had enough talk," I replied. He stayed quiet after that. But I sensed his nervousness. He was beginning to realize that I was no longer the woman desperate for his attention. I'm not sure where it will go. Perhaps I'll divorce. Or perhaps he will ask for another opportunity. But this time I'm not scared of either outcome. I no longer fear being alone. Because sometimes, being alone is better than surrounded by someone who makes you feel unseeable.